Venom: The Last Dance took a big old bite out of the box office, earning $175 million worldwide in its first weekend. Here's how it sunk its teeth into audiences. The third Venom movie actually turned out to be a bit of a disappointment domestically, making just $51 million stateside. But the movie absolutely crushed it outside the US, earning $124 million internationally, reportedly making it the third biggest American movie opening of 2024 in those countries. Only Inside Out 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine have better foreign launches in those same markets. That included especially massive debuts in Mexico, Korea, and India. The Last Dance also thrived on IMAX screens in international territories, securing the largest international IMAX debut ever in October and becoming the third biggest IMAX overseas debut in Sony's history. The movie also made a huge splash in China, pulling down $45.9 million there in its first 5 days of release. That makes it the second biggest American release there this year, after Godzilla Kong: The New Empire. After pulling in massive bank the decade prior, American films have been struggling in China in the 2020s. Audiences in China seem to favor homegrown releases now, and The Last Dance is actually already the highest-grossing American superhero film in the country since 2019. That fact is even more amazing when you consider that Venom: Let There Be Carnage wasn't even released in Chinese theaters back in 2021. From the title on down, the third solo Venom movie was very insistent on emphasizing it was a send-off for Eddie Brock and Venom. Every aspect of the movie's promotional push lingered on this notion, right down to poster taglines like "Till Death Do They Part" or "Witness the Epic Conclusion." Hammering the angle home was an immediate way to differentiate The Last Dance from the two previous Venom movies, and it also gave this installment a sense of finality that many other comic book movies no longer have.
Eddie, I'm with you to the end.
Modern entries in this subgenre typically inhabit large multimedia ecosystems full of future movie and TV plans stretching on into the next decade. Venom: The Last Dance, meanwhile, tried to carve out an identity heavily reliant on the notion that this was the end of the road for an era of Venom on the big screen. Granted, such a prolific and lucrative character won't be gone forever. Tom Hardy wasn't the first man to play Eddie Brock, and he certainly won't be the last. For now though, Venom: The Last Dance promised resolution where other comic book movie promotional pushes only hinted at future sequels. October 2024 was supposed to belong to Joker: Folie à Deux. As late as just 1 month before its release, the Todd Phillips-directed sequel was tracking to make more than $100 million in its opening weekend, without breaking a sweat. Because of that impending release, Hollywood studios cleared the month of other major releases that could have been squashed by the newest Joker movie.
How about you, Arthur? Do you still think you're a star?
But the second Joker flick bombed at the box office, sending the theatrical feature landscape spiraling. Suddenly, the month kicked off with a massive box office dud, and nothing to help compensate for its losses. Extremely gory horror sequels, Terrifier 3 and Smile 2, could only do so much to pick up the slack. Into this domain entered Venom: The Last Dance over the month's final weekend. The losses incurred by Joker 2 were a mild gain for The Last Dance, which suddenly didn't have to contend with another gargantuan comic book adaptation hogging the market. Granted, The Last Dance still underwhelmed domestically even with Joker out of the way, but the lack of another box office titan undoubtedly freed up The Last Dance to easily take the top box office spot around the globe. With October turning out to be a bit of a theatrical black hole, The Last Dance reaped big rewards. After COVID shut down theaters in March 2020, box office hits driven largely by older audiences have been hard to come by. 1 or 2 have slipped through the cracks, but for the most part, movies skewing towards the over 45 crowd have resulted in box office bombs like Horizon and American Saga Chapter 1. Unsurprisingly, Venom: The Last Dance was another domestic box office chart topper that skewed extremely young in its opening weekend. 73% of its audience over its first 3 days of release was under the age of 35, while folks between the age of 25 and 34 made it roughly a third of its entire opening weekend. None of that is very surprising given that this was a PG-13 Venom title with a weird comedy streak. Not exactly a recipe for luring in the Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris crowd.
You're bad people. Yeah, we are!
Venom: The Last Dance proved once again how integral younger viewers are to keeping movies afloat. Without those ticket buyers under 35, The Last Dance would have been in much more serious trouble at the domestic box office. Over the past year or so, movies like Taylor Swift: The Eras Tour, Five Nights at Freddy's, and Challengers flourished by channeling vibes that people under 30 could connect to. In the post-COVID theatrical landscape, youth-skewing movies are king, and Venom: The Last Dance had no trouble sitting on that throne. Tom Hardy can bring in the crowds, which no doubt gave Venom: The Last Dance a huge boost. For proof, look no further than the multiple films in his career that have crossed $500 million worldwide. Sure, that includes typical comic book movie blockbusters like The Dark Knight Rises and the first two Venom installments. But he's also raked in the cash in adult dramas like The Revenant and Dunkirk, not to mention Christopher Nolan's original smash hit, Inception. Because of that financial hot streak, Hardy's got more box office reliability than many other leading men linked solely with superhero movie roles. It may seem like a given that a big star translates to big ticket sales, but as a counterpoint, just look at Chris Hemsworth. Despite being a great actor, outside of the Thor and Avengers movies, a ton of his films have bombed at the box office. Hardy, meanwhile, has consistently delivered hits beyond his Venom exploits.
Now, before you bother telling me it's impossible.
No, it's perfectly possible. It's just bloody difficult.
That reputation can't transform every Hardy movie into a box office phenomenon, but it did help Venom: The Last Dance soar at the international box office. As Joker Foliadu can attest, following up lucrative blockbusters from years past is not a one-way ticket to box office success. The Marvels and Terminator Dark Fate are also prime examples that past franchise success doesn't guarantee a good theater run. However, Venom: The Last Dance certainly got a boost from what its predecessors accomplished. The first two Venom titles managed to crack a combined $1.3 billion worldwide. Venom: Let There Be Carnage even topped $500 million worldwide as one of the first superhero movies to open after COVID-19 shut down theaters.
Congratulations to the happy couple. We are leaving.
Shoot, even Topher Grace's version of the anti-hero helped the much-maligned Spider-Man 3 stick an $891 million worldwide landing. No matter what the setting, Venom is a popular character. With that legacy at its back, Venom: The Last Dance dropped into theaters with lots of pre-existing audience familiarity. Plus, The Last Dance promised an ending to this weird trilogy, so everyone who'd already shelled out $1 billion+ probably wanted some closure. Add in the mid-credits teasers suggesting crossovers with Venom and Tom Holland's Spider-Man, and Venom: The Last Dance had far more anticipation and moviegoer goodwill to work with than many other 2024 tentpole sequels. Venom: The Last Dance was originally set up to open on July 12, 2024. July has always been a popular month for Spider-Man features, but Venom is a darker, more sinister character than the web slinger. The previous two Venom titles had October releases, and it really seems like that's the month where the character thrives. Fortunately for Eddie Brock and the gang, the dual 2023 strikes ensured that The Last Dance could never hit that original July date. Sony would later delay The Last Dance to fall 2024, eventually settling on October 25th as a launch pad for this title. That meant the final Venom installment would go out the weekend before Halloween. Pretty much the perfect time for a horror-infused action blockbuster. This date also gave Venom: The Last Dance some distance from summer 2024 juggernauts like Deadpool and Wolverine and Inside Out 2. Bowing in late October 2024 was not the original plan for The Last Dance, but it was critical for its opening weekend haul. Comic book movies in the 2020s have often proved impenetrable for general audiences to latch onto. MCU titles like Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness and the Marvels have increasingly relied on other Marvel properties to be understood, while DC's The Flash featured central plotlines touching on older films like Man of Steel and even 1989's Batman. Morbius even featured a post-credit scene with Michael Keaton as the Vulture, setting up a Sinister Six movie that may or may not actually happen.
I'm still figuring this place out, but I think a bunch of guys like us should team up. Could do some good.
Intriguing.
Bucking this trend, Venom: The Last Dance forgoes any larger connections to non-Venom comic book movies. Save for some opening lines by Eddie Brock about a purple guy who loves stones, The Last Dance is a deeply standalone enterprise. Anyone scouring the movie for subtle Morbius and Madame Web connections will leave the theater sorely disappointed. This approach had multiple advantages for The Last Dance. For one thing, the movie was far more accessible to anyone who walked into the theater. For another, The Last Dance avoided getting connected to the dreadful critical reputations of Morbius and Madame Web. Bypassing grand comic book movie confusion was a gift for Venom: The Last Dance, one that's increasingly rare for the Marvel multiverse. Out of the 8 biggest movies released in the United States by the Sony-owned studio Columbia Pictures, all but one are based on Marvel Comics characters. Only Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle stands out among the crop of Spider-Man entries. Starting with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man in 2002, Marvel adaptations have proven instrumental to the success of Columbia Pictures and Sony as a whole. Even lesser-grossing titles like Ghost Rider drummed up respectable business. Despite more recent flops like Madame Web and Morbius, Sony has demonstrated that it's capable of doing Marvel stories increased justice. With over 2 decades of experience releasing Marvel movies, Sony's marketing team had no trouble getting Venom: The Last Dance to respectable worldwide opening weekend numbers. While it couldn't turn something like Morbius into the next Guardians of the Galaxy, the company's Marvel track record still managed to keep momentum rolling for an entire Venom trilogy, without Spider-Man actually showing up in the flesh. In its Thursday domestic box office numbers alone, Venom: The Last Dance grossed a whopping $8.5 million. While less than the Thursday night hauls of the 2 previous Venom installments, this wasn't a sharp decrease in earnings. In fact, it immediately put The Last Dance on track for a promising opening weekend. Over its entire domestic weekend, Venom: The Last Dance grossed $51 million, so its Thursday showing accounted for about 17% of that opening weekend haul. That means that the die-hard fans who couldn't wait a single day longer played an important role in the positive narrative about the movie's earnings. Venom lovers showed the appreciation for the symbiote in impressive numbers, and the opening day gross of The Last Dance ultimately soared to $21 million. Despite the big opening weekend though, the momentum hasn't lasted, with data suggesting that the film could struggle in subsequent weeks. Still, it's impossible to deny that the threequel got an impressive start, and that's all thanks to Venom's most passionate supporters.